Hi all and welcome to the Global AI Notes. Today we will talk about agents and we welcome Dave Glover from Microsoft to the stage in a few moments. Hi Dave, how are you?
Hey, very good. Hey everybody, welcome from Sydney, Australia.
That's great. So my name is Alex, I'm Microsoft AI MVP from Germany, and today we welcome Dave Glover, Principal AI Developer Advocate at Microsoft, who will talk about agents. And the stage is yours. Please welcome.
Great, thanks so much, Alexander. Hey, welcome everybody. I suspect most of you are in Europe, so I guess for most folk it'll be morning or early afternoon. It's 8 o'clock-ish here in the evening here in Australia, so it's not too bad a time. As Alex said, I'm a cloud advocate, and my role is really to connect with the developer community around building applications around AI. Just a little bit about me. I have, for better or for worse, been at Microsoft for over 30 years and have done a whole range of different technologies. And you can imagine over the last 30 years, a lot has changed at Microsoft, from Windows to Windows Phone, servers, and now cloud, and now AI. So that's a very short version of my history of what I've done. Okay, so this session here is an introduction to the Azure OpenAI Assistance API. And I'm rather assuming that you've had some experience working with large language models. You've worked most likely with Azure OpenAI, and you kind of understand things like chat completions and embeddings and all those types of things. So we're not going to go into any level of detail. I'm kind of going to assume that you've done chat completions and generative AI and those types of things. Now, as the name implies, the Azure OpenAI Assistance API lives and breathes and works on top of OpenAI models only. And that's, I guess, part of the name. Now, before I move on, you can feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm just Gloveboxes on LinkedIn. My name is Dave Glover, so Gloveboxes works. And I publish a lot on GitHub. So you'll find all my samples, all my demos, kind of work in progress sometimes, on my GitHub. So that, again, Gloveboxes on GitHub. And the solution that I'm going to be demoing today is mostly this link at aka.ms/contoso-sales-assistant. Now, I've got a few slides, mostly just to set the scene. And then the idea is that I'm just going to show you stuff. And of course, if I'm showing you stuff, there's always a risk that stuff will break, because demos do, but fingers crossed, we'll be in a good place. Okay, so what is the Azure OpenAI Assistance API, and where would you use it? So basically what it's there to do is make it simpler for you to go and build assistant or agent-like user experiences. And it cuts down on a lot of the manual work that you would need to do around things like managing context and all those types of things. So it's there to help you provide a whole range of scenarios, from performing complex computations or data analysis, file search, etc. So I just want to quickly compare and contrast between the OpenAI chat completion, so things like GPT 3.5 Turbo or GPT-4 Turbo and things like that, those types of models. So you'll be familiar with those. They're relatively lightweight and powerful, but they, as you will appreciate, they are inherently stateless. So you'll appreciate that every time, if you're building an application, you need to manage the state within your application and then repost the complete conversation and the conversation history back to the model for the model then to carry on. So you're having to worry about From an application level, you're having to worry about state, around context, around making sure that the context doesn't get too large for the model, things like that. So the number of tokens in that context will fit within the model context. So those are the kinds of things that you deal with today. And of course, there are frameworks that help make that easier. So there are things like LangChain and semantic kernel would just be two that pop up. And those are kind of almost client side or application side frameworks to help you kind of manage that overall context. Okay, so that's the chat completion API as you pretty much know it. So the assistance API, I would say one of the biggest differences is that it's stateful. So you don't have to worry about maintaining state. There is a service on the back end that is maintaining the conversational state, maintaining the context for you on your behalf. And it deals with things like making sure that the context that you're going to send to the model will fit within the model, and it would automatically prune the model and do things like that. It also deals with what we call persistent threads. Now, a thread is a conversation. So you could close the app, shut down the app, and you could come back, sign in. As long as I was able to know the thread ID for the conversation, I could restart that conversation sometime in the future. So it's stateful and it has persistent threads. Now it deals with files. So it has this kind of notion of file search. And it will deal with things like you could upload a PDF, for example, or a CSV file, and it will automatically handle the chunking of those PDF documents and creating the vectors for them or the embeddings for them, storing them, and then making them available for vector and hybrid search. So it just does it for you. And file access, or this file search capability, can be at your application level. So you might be building an application for your business and you want to have a number of PDF documents that are relevant for the whole application. Or it could be just for a part of a conversation, part of a thread. You might want to attach a file to a thread, to a conversation, to add more context. I'm going to show you kind of how that works. So I've already mentioned automatic management of a context. And it also supports multiple tools. Now, fingers crossed, you've played around with things like function calling, which is basically asking a model to extract out structured data for you, typically in JSON format, from a model to say, hey, look, I'm going to give you some parameters, a definition of what to look for in a conversation, and should you see that, then return it back to me in structured data. So function calling, hopefully you've played around with function calling already. But the one that you may not have played around with is this thing called code interpreter. And it's pretty neat. It is basically a Python sandboxed environment. So it's not full, you can't do everything and you want to go and do inside this sandboxed environment, but you can do a lot of quite powerful things. Things like additional computation. You might want to go and do some additional analysis. You might want to create graphs, all those types of things. I'm going to show you some of those things, how that works. So the kind of the tools you kind of think about, you've got function calling, which has already been around with the OpenAI chat completions models. What's new with the assistance API is the code interpreter, as well as file search. Okay, so how does it work? So you create an assistant. So if you've got a web, I kind of take this analogy. If you've got a web developer background, then you're kind of familiar with the idea of a session manager. And a session manager, if you've got a building a web app, it's responsible for managing all the interactions with that website. Well, an assistant object is responsible for the overall scope of the application and managing all the conversations. So all the threads in this case. So you have an assistant, you go and create an assistant. It's an object that lives inside the assistance API. You give it a name. You tell it what model it's associated with. In this case here, it's GPT-4 Turbo. And then you give it some instructions. And the instructions it's like a meta prompt. And it's effectively the same as the system message when you're creating context when you're using chat completions. So it's called an instruction. An instruction can live at an assistant level, but actually, interesting enough, an instruction can also live at a thread level. So you can override it, but probably most of the time you'd live at the assistant level. And then you have these tools, which I mentioned before. So you've got file search, code interpreter, and functions. Okay, so the next thing you would do is that when a user wanted to start chatting, your application would go and call the Assistance API and say, hey, look, go and create me a thread. The Assistance API would create you a thread and then return back an ID. And that becomes the ID for the conversation. And then you kind of attach messages to it. So the user might say, hey, which museums can you recommend in Vienna? And then the model, what would happen then is that you would get what's called a run. And then the run would basically take that thread and then run it through or past the GPT-4 turbo model. And you'd get back a response. This would be the assistant message. So the assistant message would then be added back onto the thread. The conversation would say, hey, look, do I need an umbrella in Vienna today? Again, the assistant would create a run. The run would run that complete message context through the model, through the large language model, GPT-4 Turbo, and then you get back your response. No, it's sunny, I don't need an umbrella. So that's kind of what's going on. And these are the kind of the core concepts. You have an assistant object, which you think about is the scope of the application. You have a thread, and a thread is just like, it's a user conversation, typically a user and an assistant. But if it was an autonomous agent, maybe it's another, an assistant message. And then you've got these things called runs. And the runs are responsible for executing that context against the model or running that against the model. Okay, so I've touched on this already. So we've kind of got tools. We've got this code interpreter, which I said before is a sandboxed environment, Python environment. And what will happen is that the large language model, as you may already appreciate, large language models are actually quite good. Sorry, maybe say this the other way. Large language models aren't particularly good at doing complex maths, or sometimes not particularly good at doing simple maths. That's just not their probability-based models, and they will kind of calculate the next token based on probability, which is not great for maths. But what large language models are good at doing is that they're good at writing code to solve mathematical problems. And that's what's really going on. So the code interpreter, the large language model is saying, okay, I can see the flow here. They're asking to calculate something, or they want a pie chart, or they want something done. I know how to write the code for that, how to write the Python code for that. I'm going to generate that Python code, send it to the code interpreter. The code interpreter is then going to run that code and then return back the response. Now, it's super important to remember this is not the full Python. It's very sandboxed. And you really has limited access to the outside world in terms of being able to do anything. I mentioned file search before. So file search is really around kind of RAG style applications. So it deals with all the complexities of vectorizing a document, chunking up a document, vectorizing it, putting it in a store, and then making it available for hybrid search for RAG style applications. You've got also quite a lot of control over how that chunking happens. You might say, well, this document here, look, I don't want it chunked at the default. I want to change the way in which it gets chunked. And documents that live in the vector store also have a life cycle or lifetime. I think by default, that a document will be held in a vector store for 7 days. Now you can change that. You can say hold it forever, or hold it for 1 day, or hold it for an hour, or whatever you want to go and do. You've got control over that. And then the last tool is kind of the custom tools, which is really function calling. And fingers crossed you played around with function calling with the chat completion models. Okay, so first demo. So the place I'm going to go to, I've got two main demos. I'm going to show you what you can do inside the Azure AI Studio in the playground. And then I've got a custom app that I've written that you've got access to all the source code. In fact, you can give it a go as well. I'll show you how you can use that in a moment. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to pop across to the assistant's playground. Now, what I've got in here, I've already created a new assistant. And I promise you, when I click on new assistant, all it does is just gives me blank places for me to go and fill in. And so what you need to define for an assistant, you need to define the model. So I'm using GPT-4o. You give it a name, and then you give it a set of instructions. And if I just pop across over here, just so this is a bit bigger, you can see that these are the instructions that I've given the assistant. And as I said before, think of it as just the system message if you're using chat completions. And you can see in this one here, all I'm doing, we'll just see if I can make that a bit smaller. You can see you are an advanced sales analyst assistant for Contoso. Your role is to be polite, professional, kind of the responsible AI stuff. And then you tell it, well, where's it going to get its data? So you're telling it you will access all your sales data from the uploaded CSV file. And I've already uploaded that, and I'll show you what that looks like in a moment. And then you kind of give it a bit more context. Here are some examples of the data structure. You can say, hey, look, these are the regions: Africa, Asia, Europe, and America. I've got some product categories. So I've got climbing gear, camping gear, apparel, etc. So you can see all this is doing is setting some context. And you can see I've already pasted that context into this instruction window. Okay, so if I go and click on Tools, you'll see that I've enabled the code interpreter, and I've already uploaded a file here called Contoso Sales Data. And I'll just pop across to Finder and to Finder. And all it is, it's just a CSV file, and it's just got region, product category, product type, month, revenue, discounts, shipping, etc. That's all that's on that file. And you can see I've already uploaded it. And what I'm going to do is we'll keep it simple. We'll say, first of all, I'm just going to say hello. So just typed in hello to the prompt. And because I've given it, we'll just say type in help. It says here goes some sample questions. You can start, and it knows these sample questions because in the context, I told it about things like you're selling camping gear, jackets, etc. So that's how it knows to be able to say, hey, look, what are the total sales by region? So we'll just take this and we'll paste that in. And what this will do is it will use file search. So the large language model will reach out, the Assistance API will reach out to that vectorized version of the CSV file that I've uploaded. As you can see in here, I've now got my sales by region. Okay, so what I could say is show me as a pie chart. Now, what will happen next is that the large language model will figure out, okay, I can do that with Python. And you can see if I hover over the code interpreter, and I know this is quite small, and I've got an example, you can see it a bit bigger in a moment. You can see, oh, this is the Python code that was executed. You can see I think it's using Plotly. So it's using Matplotlib to go and create me a nice pie chart. So you can start seeing how this is working. Now, this example is quite oriented towards data analysis. And so is my next example. I don't want you to think, oh, this is just about data analysis. This could just as easily be around customer support or an education or a training type interaction. So I guess the main thing is that because I'm showing you the ones that are quite data analysis oriented, don't think that's the only thing you can do. So anyway, the Assistants API, which is part of the Azure OpenAI Studio, it's a place where you can just play around with ideas. I've got data sources and things like that to go and do. So that's really just for experimentation. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about is this application that I've built. Now, if you take a screenshot of that link at the bottom, so aka.ms/contoso-sales-assistant, you can click on that link or use that link, and then you can actually try out the assistant yourself. So this is one that I've built. So in fact, these are the, well, hang on, we'll go show the demo first. Okay, so back in the browser, and as I said, this is the assistant that you can link to with that link that I put in the slides. So it's up there, and it's free for you to give it a try. So I can come along here and I can say help. Now I'm going to tell you a bit about how this application works. So what this application is doing is it has a SQLite database. And that SQLite database has around about 40,000 rows. In fact, it has exactly 40,000 rows of synthetic data in it. And it has sales data in there. So product category, product region, product type, discounts, number of units sold. I'm sure there's something in, and probably revenue for that. And then what the large language model is. And when the application starts up, the first thing that the application does is it goes and queries the SQLite database for the schema. So it gets back the schema for each column, of the schema for the tables, and as well as the type for each column. And not only does it do that, on startup, it also gets a list of the regions, product types, product categories, and reporting years. And then what it does is it adds all of that context to the instruction. In fact, I'll show you very briefly over here in Visual Studio. So you can see this is the, I'll try and make the screen just a little bit bigger. There's always a fine line between making it too big. Okay, so these are the instructions for the Assistant API. And then what I do is I have a call which goes off and grabs out the schema and some key data from the SQLite database. So I get all that. And then what I'm doing is, you can see I've got all the context, and you can see what I'm going to do is I'm going to add in all that information about the backend database into the context for the instruction. So what happened, that means now, is that the assistant understands the backend data store. And then down through here, you'll see in here somewhere, use the ask database function for sales data queries. And then I say things like default to aggregate data and less detailed requests. And so basically the application knows the context. And then further down here, I've got a tool, a function defined. And you can see that this function here is used to answer the questions about Contoso sales data. By executing a SQLite query against the database. And you can see what it's going to do. It's going to say the input should be a well-formed SQLite query to extract information based on the user's question. And it says here, the query result will be returned as plain text, not in JSON format. Okay, so that's the function that I've got defined. And this function's role, when it gets sent to the large language model, if the large language model thinks it can write a SQL query to get your data, the large language model will write the SQL. It will return that back to my application as a function call. I then go and call the SQLite, execute that query, get the data back from that database request, and then add it back into the context of that thread. Remember that thread is a context. It's got the user's question, the data, etc. Now you'll notice the other things that I've got on here for this tools list is I've got this thing called a code interpreter. So remember, the code interpreter is the Python sandboxed, and I've got file search for embedded vectors. Okay, so I typed in help, and this is how it knew that how to give me some contextual help. And I could say help in German. And because it's a large language model and I'm using GPT-4o, it's pretty good at dealing with multilingual. Now, it's a lot better at German than I am. I've got a funny feeling this is a products in Europe best-selling or something like those lines. We'll go and paste that in German. And then what that's done is the large language model has generated the SQL command for me. And you can see there it's done a order by limit to 5 results, okay, which is great. And you can see these are the results that have come back from the SQLite database. And then what I'm doing is I'm adding in this to the context of the conversation. Okay, so we'll just pop that up. Now, by the way, the user interface for this application, I'm using something called Chainlit. And Chainlit is a framework which is geared towards conversational AI. So the Chainlit is doing all the heavy lifting in terms of the conversational AI. So I've not had to write any of that. All I've had to go and write is some Python code to go and interact with the Assistance API and then pass the data into Chainlit which is managing the web interface for me. Okay, so now I've got that back. I could say create a pie chart. And what this is going to do now is that the large language model will say, okay, well, I've got the context from the database. So I know that this person here is having a conversation around product sales in Europe. And you can see what it's done. And I'm just going to jump over here a bit. As you can see that this was the Python code that was executed to go and create this pie chart. Now, in this example, by the way, I want to point out that I've enabled what's called chain of thought. And I've enabled chain of thought in the user interface because this is a learning tool. So, of course, in production, you would never show the chain of thought. So just so you know, it's just something nice that Chainlit can do. So hopefully that made sense. So we'll come over here and create a new thread. And I'll do it we'll do this one in English. So create a vivid pie chart of sales by region. So you know what's going to happen. The first thing it's going to do, the large language model generated the SQL command. And then that context is passed back to the large language model. The next thing the large language model thinks is like, okay, I know how to go and write Python code to go and send to the code interpreter to go and generate a pie chart. And that's kind of what's going on. Now, the first question I almost always get about this demo, and it makes people quite nervous. And they think, wow, you're generating SQL commands dynamically. That to me just feels like danger, like a red flag. Something's going to go wrong. Now, clearly, what you would do if you were doing this in production is, for one thing, you would make sure that the database was read-only. So nobody can come along and hack the database, because you don't want some smart person figuring out how to go and drop the table. So obviously you'd go and secure the backend data store. Now, the other thing, the way this works best, and again, for enterprise scenarios, typically what you'd do is you'd got your back-end transactional systems, and you'd normally do an extract, transform, and load. And this solution works best when the column names have kind of user-friendly names. So we can see how that's working. So that's kind of what's going on. So you would absolutely, if you're doing this in production, you would always lock this database down. And again, I can't overemphasize that this is quite a data analysis scenario, but don't limit your thinking to that. Now, the other really interesting thing about when I wrote this application is I tried to describe this. This application knows almost nothing about itself, has almost no self-awareness. And you might think, well, what does that mean? And it means that really this application gets its personality or its behavior really by the instruction. So I could turn around and say, well, I'm not a Contoso sales data analysis application. I could say I'm a Contoso customer support application. And clearly I would change some of the instructions down through here. And then what I would do, there's a class in here called sales data. I would change the backend data store. It might be my database for customer support. And you would change that, and the application would then go off, and when it started, we'd go and get the schema and load up the schema, load that up into the instructions, and the application would be off. So a really fascinating application, and that really reusable, because most of this application is really being driven by the tools, the functions, and the instructions, and the back-end data source. So really, and the rest of the application, there's a bit there to go and create, where if I come down here for managing the messages, there's a bit of kind of just junk code to go and make sure you've got an assistant. You'll see down here, we've got stuff there for attachments. Actually, sorry, I forgot to do part of my demo. I can come along here and we'll just open this up. Go to my GitHub. Resources. And what I've done is I've just attached go to resources. All this file is just a product data sheet. So it's got camping, it's got category, camping and hiking, product type, family camping tents, etc. So that's all it's got in it. And then what I can do now is I pop back over here, I can say, tell me about tents we sell for beginners. That's not quite spelled right. Anyway, that's close enough. And what that will do is it'll load up that PDF document. You can see that the uploading is completed. It will then vectorize that PDF, and then it will come along, and then now it has some additional context in here about suitable tents for beginners. Okay, so then I could say, show me sales by region of tents and include a brief description of the tents in the table. Okay, hopefully that will be all right. So what that's going to do is it's going to grab the data out of SQLite. So it's generated a SQL query. And now it's got that additional context from that PDF document. You can see over here, you can see that now I've got the region, I've got total revenue, but you can see I've now got tent description. Now this tent description is not on the database. This tent description has come from that PDF document that I've uploaded and added in additional context. Okay, so that's what I wanted to call the demo to a halt. Now, if you want to take a screenshot of this, so the Contoso Sales Assistant, and I'm just going to show you how to get into the application. So grab that aka.ms/contoso-sales-assistant, and we'll go across to the browser, paste in that link. This will take you to an event. You need to log in with your GitHub account, and then just follow the instructions down here. So follow these steps to connect. And then basically you scroll down here, you copy your API key, and you come back up to the top and you navigate to the Contoso Sales Assistant. And that Contoso Sales Assistant is there. I've already logged in, but I'll log out, and I can log in and I can paste in my key, paste in your key, and you'll be off and you can start playing around with it. And you can go in here and you can change light mode, dark mode. There's a conversation history and things like that. And that's all been driven by Chainlit, really, not the Assistants API. Okay, so Alex, that is pretty much a demo. So I think we're going to open up for any questions.
Yes, sure. Thank you very much. Great demos and great presentation. Thanks for this. We have one question on several assistants. How was it built? Perhaps if I want to run several assistants simultaneously, should I add several threads for these? How does it work? Or is it working?
Now, think of an assistant as really a scope. It's an app.
Mhm.
So there's nothing to stop you creating multiple assistants, but it wouldn't really make sense. So you can create multiple assistants, and you can create threads, and actually they are independent objects, thinking about it.
Mhm.
And when you go and run them, you bring them together. You say, okay, this is the assistant, and I want to combine this thread with this assistant. But the main way to think about an assistant, it's like the Contoso sales app. That would be an assistant.
Mhm.
The sales support application, that would be another assistant. So you go and create an assistant object for that. So think about it more like that. And then threads, you would associate them with the application that the end user's interacting
Mhm.
with.
That's great. Thank you very much. I tried your app also and asked which data is there in 2024, and also uh, get some marks there. For example, I have written not Europa, so just no Europe, not right, well, the wrong way, and it's still figured out I'm talking about
Yeah,
Europe, and ask me, or also some give me some information in the right language. So if you do some
yeah.
typos there, it just to mention it out. I was really that's it's really great demos to show. Okay, the data is there, and you get your presentation.
Yeah. So that's a really good point. So I think my screen still, yeah, it has been. So I've got sales of tents by Asia.
Hmm.
Now I don't have a region called Asia. I have a region called Asia Pacific,
Yes.
but it's smart enough to be able to figure that out. So now the other question, the other thing I would love folk to do, if you get to play around with this application,
Hmm.
open up the slider and down the bottom you'll see the repo, and that will take you to the repo.
Hmm.
And I would dearly love, because the trouble, of course, when you build the application yourself, you go and test things and you end up testing the same things over and
Yeah,
over.
sure.
I would love it if you folk played around with it, and please raise any issues. I
Hmm.
would be your best friend.
Okay, so
I
I
would
will
appreciate
post
that.
also this one also to the chat. So we have posted also AKMS Contoso Sales Assistant for all the guys, and now we post also the GitHub link. So all of the people can also read directly this issue region that you mentioned directly there. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's one. And yeah, we had more than 220 people in online showing a lot of interest to your talk. So thank you very much. We are a
Absolute
little
pleasure.
bit over the time, so that's why it was a pleasure to have you here. Thank you very much for your time, and have a nice day. See you next time. Thanks.
Take care. Thanks, everybody, and enjoy your day. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.